If you're looking to create that beautiful blurry background in your photos, a more expensive lens with a wider aperture won't save you. In fact, you can achieve it with the gear you have right now. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why your background isn't blurring exactly the way that you want. And the fix costs you nothing. No new gear, no upgrades, just a couple adjustments and how you're setting up your shot. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Karen. I taught myself photography and I built a 13-year portrait business. And I'm here to make photography so much less complicated to learn. And if you want a shortcut to better photos now, my free guide, Fix It Fast, covers the 5 most common beginner mistakes, including why your background looks busy and distracting, and exactly how to fix it. The link is below and it's completely free. But first, let me tell you about a fisheye lens that I bought in year 2 of my photography business and that I've only used 3 times, because this is a perfect example of gear obsession and why I want to save you from it. Gear obsession is real in photography culture, and for most beginners who haven't mastered the basics, this can be really confusing, making you think you need to purchase new lenses in order to get the shots that you want. I absorbed this very early. My brother, who taught me photography, was into collecting lenses himself, so I kept thinking I needed a new lens for all the different situations I was going to shoot in. But that led me to buying lenses that I just wasn't ready for. I purchased a 100mm macro lens that had a minimum focal distance, and I didn't understand that at the time. And when I purchased this 12 to 24mm fisheye lens, the idea was that it would somehow open up more creativity with my photography. I thought I might be shooting real estate or perhaps trying to make spaces look bigger than they actually were, but it turns out a fisheye lens distorts your angle of view, so it's not great for portraits. And honestly, the times that I did need a wide angle lens, a 35mm on my kit lens would have worked just fine. Purchasing specialty lenses for one use case almost never pays off at the beginner stage. It's more important to get your skills down first every single time and to learn how to use what you already have. Let's talk about depth of field in plain English. Depth of field simply means how much of your scene is in sharp focus at any given moment. A really shallow depth of field can be as thin as a sheet of paper, and a larger depth of field can be infinitely wider. But there are 3 elements to creating your depth of field: your aperture, the space between you and your subject, and the distance between your subject and the background. All 3 of these elements have to work together. So just having a lower aperture isn't enough to save a photo that is poorly spaced. When I hear terms like wide aperture and fast lenses, they're always confusing to me, and I don't find them very helpful. So the version that makes sense to me is when you're using a lower aperture or a lower f number, you're going to get less in focus. And when you're using a larger f number, you're going to get more in focus. It's really that simple. For portraits with a blurry background, aperture is really the driving force here. So you'll want to set that setting first when you're shooting in manual mode. I thought for a long time that simply having a lens that had a really low aperture was going to create that blurry background in my photos. But I really didn't understand how much distance matters in this equation. I was always standing too close to my subjects, thinking I need to fix flyaway hairs or perhaps change their posing and help them with that. But in doing so, I didn't have enough space between me and the subject, and I ended up making some of the things that I wanted in focus blurry or soft. And I came to realize that if I'm standing a lot farther back from my subject and I'm not able to run back and forth and fix those tiny little things, it's a lot easier to edit those later than it is to edit in sharpness that wasn't there in the first place. And trust me, I have tried. So think of it this way. If you are using a lens that has 1.8 as the lowest aperture, if you're about 3 feet away from that subject, you're only going to have about 3 to 4 inches of space in that plane of focus. And sometimes that's really difficult to get the things in focus that you need. And simply backing up 5 or 6 feet from your subject, all of a sudden you have 8 to 10 inches in your plane of focus. And that makes it a lot easier for getting sharper details. The other important aspect to this equation is making sure there's enough space behind your subject in between them and the background. You can put your subject right up against a background, and no matter what lens you have, you won't get a blurry background because there simply isn't enough space between them. The distance between the subject and their background is really what creates that dreamy blurry effect. And the distance between you and the subject is what contributes to how much of the subject is in focus. So if you're taking test shots and you're not getting the results that you're hoping to achieve, simply back up and give more space between you and your subject. You may think you need an expensive lens to be able to achieve the blurry background in your photos, but even with a simple kit lens on a starter camera like a Canon Rebel, you can still achieve this look. I tested it out today with this lens, which is an 18 to 55mm kit lens. And using the lens at 18mm, the aperture only goes down to 3.5, but I was still able to create a blur with the background because I had enough space between the subject and that background. And I was sure to give enough space between me and the subject. Since most kit lenses are zoom lenses, these can be a lot more ideal for when you're shooting kids running around or dynamic situations. But for a dedicated portrait session with the subject who's sitting or standing still, a 50mm prime lens is going to be a great investment, and they're typically less than $150 for the 1.8 aperture. And for the 1.2 aperture version, you can pay well into the thousands. But to a beginner, this really doesn't make much difference, because until you're able to master the technique of giving space between you and the subject and space between the subject and the background, it's nearly impossible to get your subject in focus. So making sure you master those techniques on whatever equipment you have is always going to be the smarter move before you purchase better gear. And when you are ready, the 50mm is a great and affordable purchase and creates beautiful portraits. Sometimes it might feel like you're doing everything right to achieve that blurry background, but something is off and you can't quite put your finger on it. Your aperture is nice and low, but something's just not landing. And this could possibly be other things in your settings, such as your shutter speed, your exposure, or your white balance. And that's exactly what Fix It Fast covers. The 5 most common culprits and fast fixes for each, including distracting backgrounds. The link is below, go grab it. So the blurry background you're trying to achieve was never inside an expensive lens. It was always about creating more space to achieve that look. And when you are ready to upgrade, you'll know how to use what you're buying. Go create some space and go get that blur in your images. And if you're still watching, leave me a comment below and tell me what kind of lens you're using to create that blur. And I'll see you next time.